All right, A Piece of Denise is back. In this week's episode, all my childhood favorite TV shows. Stay tuned. All right, peeps. So this week's episode is about all of my favorite TV shows that I used to watch as a kid. And there's no way to start off this podcast episode without talking about the Ninja Turtles 1987 edition. I think as far back as I can remember, I had always wanted to be proficient in martial arts. And I think that when we really dig back into it, it has to do with the fact that I saw myself as a Ninja Turtle, much again to my mom's chagrin. Even as a kid, I would go off to school and I would have to come back and be back in enough time to see their episode for that week or that day. So people would be, the kids would be at the bus stop and talking and hanging out, and I'd be like, oh man, I gotta go because the show is about to start and I can't stand here talking to you. So there is a profound impact that Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello, and Raphael had on my life. I went to school. I wanted to have a bandana and get one in every color so I could decide who I wanted to be for that day. And I think from ages 4 to 8, my parents kind of allowed me to dress up kind of around the house as a Ninja Turtle. But my mom drew a hard line on buying me nunchucks, which everybody else was able to get their parents to buy. And I think that was probably a good decision since we all started like beating each other up with them. So probably wasn't the best idea, but I never missed an episode. And it always seemed to be around when I was young, and I didn't realize until I was much older that it ran for 10 seasons. And that's a long time in regards to, a kid's show, especially when we start talking about some of the other shows that I used to watch. And, it only takes 60 episodes to get into syndication and they would move on to other things. So 10 seasons is a long time. I also didn't understand why I had such an affinity for James Avery, who played Uncle Phil on The Fresh Prince. But what I didn't realize is that he did the voice of the Shredder. So he had been around a lot longer in my life than I originally thought. So there's that. But yeah, I used to run around wanting to karate chop things. I actually was able to talk my mom into paying for some karate classes because I wanted to be a ninja when I grew up. So shout out to TMNT. Now I kind of read the comic books and understand that there's a whole thing about that. It always impresses me when my nieces and nephews also stumble into things. I remember when my nephew came to visit and he wanted to watch the Ninja Turtles. Well, I put on the 87 version and he was looking at me like, what is this? This is not what I watch. I should have known that they're all like 3D now and cooler things and whatever. But he sat and watched it and still thought it was good. So bridging the gap between generations, go TMNT. And even when the live action movies came out, I loved everything about those. You couldn't tell me nothing about Secret of the Ooze. I watch it to this day. So I wanted two katana like Leonardo. I wanted some nunchucks like Michelangelo. I could see myself with a bow staff like Donatello. My mother was not having it. And there was no way I was getting any side like Raphael. But I had a red bandana and I wore it every chance I could and told everybody that I was Raphael. So if y'all see pictures of me back in the day, that's what the red bandana meant. So there we have it. So in regards of this list, I think TMNT 87 has to be like one of my all-time favorite cartoons to watch as a kid. But keep in mind, not all the things on this list are going to be cartoons. So, but I think it's easy to kind of branch into the next thing. No list is complete without talking about the Disney afternoon block that contained DuckTales, Darkwing Duck, TaleSpin, and Chippendales Rescue Rangers. A lot of my life as a kid revolved around getting home and not doing homework and entertaining myself in other ways. And so for me, that usually meant kind of having a list of all things that you couldn't miss. And when you were in elementary school, these are kind of all of the things that my friends were watching. So if you missed the episode, then you couldn't join in at the lunch table talking about what new thing happened. So DuckTales was definitely it. As far as I didn't realize how much of that show was adventure and action, and it just was a fun show for me to watch. I knew that I wanted to be rich and swim in my money like Scrooge McDuck. But I guess the older that I get, I realize it's actually just a really great show. It has to be in order to be remade. And we won't talk about how great the theme song was, because it was so great that even in the remake, they didn't change the theme song. So that kind of speaks for itself. One thing that I didn't realize was basically that it was much older than I thought it was. So a lot of what I watched as a kid, I didn't realize were reruns. I thought they were airing in real time. But DuckTales originally aired in 1987, which was the year I was born. But by the time I was watching it, they were reruns, so no big deal. But I always had this idea that I was going to be dropped off with a rich uncle and be able to spend time with him and go on adventures and do gold digs like Huey, Dewey, and Louie. But, I digress. Darkwing Duck was another one of my favorites. And I swear that Disney employed kind of the same people to write these intros because they were all on point. But they had kind of the same kind of feel. So the Darkwing Duck intro still hits to this day. If you say it doesn't, I have to judge your character. But it's another show that I've rewatched as an adult that still holds up. I still get that feeling of nostalgia. But poor Darkwing was saving the city of St. Canard, and nobody knew who he was. Nobody gave him respect. And he kind of battled that, do I want to be a hero for the fame, or do I want to save people? So it was a fun time. And there was a lot of crossover characters that I also enjoyed. And as a kid, crossovers always blew my mind because I'm like, oh, these are my two favorite shows. It didn't take much to impress me as a kid. But yeah, Darkwing is also something I watch with my niece. She's gone through this thing where she wants to know what I used to be interested in. And with the advent of Disney Plus, we are able to watch some of the shows that I used to watch as a kid. I knew kind of right off the bat that I was going to get Disney Plus because it had the Disney afternoon block. It had some DComs in it. And that'll be an episode for another time. But it made it easier because I spent a lot of time when I had my DVD collection trying to get a lot of these shows that weren't out in their entirety. So I'm able to see them on Disney Plus, which is always good for me and for my nieces and nephews. So, of course, next on the list had to be TaleSpin. And I think for me, my affinity for TaleSpin had to do with the fact that there's a lot of people that are going to tell me that my favorite Disney movies were The Lion King or Beauty and the Beast. And those things are true. But I had a special place in my heart for The Jungle Book. So when they had a TV show, that was based on or around Baloo, I knew I was going to watch it. And I loved every single episode. And I think my dad still now has nightmares that consist of that intro song that still hits again to this day, you know? But I mean, as a 7, 8-year-old, what TV show about a 1930s bush pilot wouldn't speak to you, right? And so, of course, he's supposed to be a cargo pilot, and, you know, they do things all by radio. And it was just him flying his plane into dangerous situations and having to battle off pirates and things like that. So I think I was definitely taken with the action adventure plot of the Disney afternoon block, you know. So it really spoke to me. And even to this day, when I'm feeling down or nostalgic, I turn that on Disney Plus. It always helps. So I'm definitely a nostalgia girl. And lastly, you got Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers, another hit they had on their hands, but it was also something that, like, I believe also like debuted in 87, 88, and then I actually stopped running in 1990, 91. Oh, I'm sorry. It went off the air in 93, but it did air in 88. So it was much older than I thought. And again, I thought it was airing in real time when I was watching it after this. But another hit song on your hand. And this was kind of my first foray into kind of detective stories and detectives, because that'll be a show for another time too. My love of all things detective stories and murder mysteries. But this was that on a small scale. So you got Chip 'n Dale, who open a detective agency for all things that the police can't handle because there's, you know, it's too small. And older me that thinks that's a cute tagline. But I think another thing that entertained me was that they constantly had to go up against this big cat who they called Fat Cat. Villainous cats, you know. They always had to follow the clues, and they knew what to do and who to take out and how to solve things for their clients, which I thought was fun for me, you know. But I think as I got older, it's funny to know that, you know, Chip is modeled after Indiana Jones with the bullwhip, the fedora, the leather jacket. And Dale is modeled after basically Magnum PI with his Hawaiian shirts and things like that. So that's an Easter egg that I enjoy finding out, particularly after watching it the other way around, you know. And when you're a kid and you're watching things with your parents, they pick up on things pretty quickly. But going back and being able to watch those 2 things or 3 things and figure out, oh, that's where they got that from. It's pretty funny to me anyway. It's always fun to look back on things and kind of figure out where your interest in certain things that you have now started. So we'll chalk Chip 'n Dale up to my love of all things detective stories. And then we'll chalk up, you know, Darkwing Duck to all of my DC, Marvel, superhero stuff. And of course, DuckTales up to all of my action adventure interests. So there was something for everybody in the Disney afternoon block. And of course, there were more cartoons that kind of filtered in and filtered out after certain shows got to syndication. But these were my faves. And no cartoon list would be complete without talking about Scooby-Doo, who's still around to this day. Everybody you know has an installment of Scooby-Doo that they enjoy. And if they try to tell you that they don't, again, judge their character. But Scooby-Doo was something I was able to watch as a kid because it was something that my mother watched when she was younger. And I often remember that it was the last thing that I was able to watch before bed because I had a strict 8 o'clock bedtime. So Scooby-Doo used to come on at 7 and then again at 7:30. So once I watched those two shows, it was time for bed. And I remember that like it was yesterday. So a lot of people now will ask me, when you get, your Fire TV or, your Apple TV, why do you always look for whether or not they have Scooby-Doo for you to watch? It's a comfort show of mine. So I spent a lot of time with Scooby wanting a talking dog. I think there's a downside to that, though, because I don't think I had enough food to feed a dog like Scooby. And then also, I wasn't interested in catching ghosts, so I just kind of wanted a talking dog, but it was fine. There's certain things that I laugh about Scooby-Doo, the early versions that I watched, the Scooby-Doo show, Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, because that's another kind of mystery trope that I've hung on to most of my life. So, having a gang of people trying to solve a mystery, sending criminals to jail, unmasking the ghost, getting the story broken down for you in many ways after they figured out who the culprit is. That's still my favorite thing. And as a young person, I don't think I really understood that genre had that form of storytelling for much longer than when Scooby-Doo was around. Sadly, Hanna-Barbera really tried to overdo this formula, and I think I really liked Josie and the Pussycats as well. But as far as their other spinoffs, I was over it. If it didn't have a talking dog or an all-girl band, I wasn't into it. But at this point, Scooby-Doo is the same age as my mom, who's 56. And he's gone through many new reincarnations. And the Guinness Book of World Records says he's the most reincarnated cartoon since his inception in 1969. So shout out to Scooby-Doo. So that brings me to all of my educational TV that I used to watch, either before school or on the weekends or during the summertime, because summertime was always a good time to catch up on all the stuff you hadn't been watching, messing around at school for 8 hours. But the favorites that come to mind is definitely Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. I don't think I've ever had a beef with a woman as long as I've had beef with Carmen Sandiego. Okay. Why was she always stealing things? Why could I never catch her? These are answers that I need. And when I was a kid, going to school and you would go to the computer lab and they had the games kind of preloaded on everyone's account. And one of them was Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. And so you used to have to chase her all over. Nowadays, you can kind of get them simulated on different websites. But man, I had almost gotten to be a private detective and I almost caught her. But the game show really gave me life. I didn't realize that the game show was created by folks at National Geographic because they had taken a poll and several adults couldn't identify basic countries on a map. So they decided to make an educational show, and she was the quote-unquote villain. So you had to run all over, catch her and her henchmen. You had to be able to identify different areas on a map, different capitals, and answer certain questions. And that was my favorite. I think trying to catch her at the end on the large map where you had to identify different countries or different states or different things. That was the most stressful thing I've ever seen in my life. And I've even kind of rewatched a couple of episodes on YouTube. It's the most stressful thing you've ever experienced. And who thought 45 seconds was enough to identify 8 different countries? I think it was a setup. A couple of kids have done it that I've rewatched as an adult, but like, there's no way that that's enough time. So, and what I wouldn't have given to be on that show and give it a try. You know what I mean? And kids' game shows were definitely my thing. Because just like any event that you watch as an adult, you sat there as a kid and you swore up and down that you could do better than the people who were doing it on TV. But there was no way my mother was going to ever let me do some of these shows. Like Family Double Dare. That was a favorite of mine on Nickelodeon because I was, interested in trying to avoid being slimed and wanting my family to vacation in Orlando, Florida. So, but there was no way my mother was going to pick the giant nose. It wasn't happening. Aside from the fact that we didn't have the money to vacation in Florida, the real kicker is that she wasn't going to pick the giant nose to find the flag. And I wanted to slide down the slide into the giant sundae. I wanted to tackle the giant pizza to get the flag. And I always wanted to, make money. I figured that was the easiest way to make money if you take all your family on Family Double Dare. But I think at the time that I was watching my show, my brother was probably like 18 months old, so he wouldn't have been able to participate. So I think that you needed at least 4 or 5 people, and he wasn't going to be old enough anytime soon. So that was out anyway. After those two, that led me to Guts. And I mean, Guts was such an intense show. It was such a great show because it showed, and then of course they made it Global Guts, but then it showed like girls in a light where they could be sporty and they could dominate and things like that, which as an adult I think is a big deal. But like trying to run the obstacle course and do the different events. Listen, I wanted to be suspended from jumper cables. Okay. And I call them jumper cables on purpose because they was always jumping off something and bouncing up and down. I wanted to slam dunk. I wanted to shoot the targets and things like that. So all of those things are on Paramount Plus if you want to see those again. And then, of course, Legends of the Hidden Temple. That by far was one of my favorite game shows. If I had to rank them, of course, Carmen Sandiego goes first, but Legends of the Hidden Temples was a very close second because I absolutely wanted to be a silver snake. I wanted to cross the moat because that was always the first obstacle. And then, I had the mind of a steel trap so I could answer questions to get down the stone steps. But the real issue was the Shrine of the Silver Monkey. Why couldn't any of the kids put together that 3-piece monkey? And I would be in my house screaming at them. You have to hurry up because the temple guards are going to come and get you. And you're not putting this statue together the proper way. It's killing me. And sure enough, there was always somebody who got startled by the temple guards. The other person had to go in. They almost never made it out with the treasure. It was a very stressful game. It didn't stop me from wanting to do it, but it was stressful to watch. But I never missed it. That by far is one of the shows I know I've seen every episode of. So. And now that brings me to all of my favorite educational shows as a kid. I know everybody's going to say Arthur because Arthur ran a very long time on PBS and has been a staple on PBS for a very long time. And I used to love Arthur, no shade to Arthur. And the opening song is still a hit. But I think what I always enjoyed was Wishbone. And I always tell people, a lot of y'all weren't taught your classic literature by a Jack Russell Terrier, and it shows. So for those of you that don't know, Wishbone was about a Jack Russell Terrier who was owned by this young child. And a lot of what the child's conflicts were resembled a lot of like plots from classic literature. And he would, go into his dream sequence and act them out, and he would be the main character. So he would do things like, Hamlet, The Prince and the Pauper, Sherlock Holmes, The Odyssey, different things. And that was another thing I used to watch all the time. I don't know that I was actually conscious that I was interested in watching that show, but when it was on, I sat down and took it all in. What I wasn't prepared for was getting to high school and later on college and being able to tell you basic plot points about stories that I hadn't read yet at that point in their entirety, but it was based on what Wishbone taught me. So that's a show that I think that they need to bring back because that's definitely educational. I stuck to the Magic School Bus, but that had to do with the Scholastic Book Fair, because when you went to the book fair, it was an event. Okay. And once I figured out that there was going to be a show based on books that I had seen at the book fair, I knew I wasn't going to miss it. And who didn't love Miss Frizzle? Right. So everybody wanted to go on a field trip with her, except Arnold, apparently, because I would have loved to have been in an aquarium or in a volcano or trying to figure out what's going on. I trusted Miss Frizzle. So, good times. I was glad that they did kind of a remake and brought that back a bit. There's a couple of episodes on Netflix, so that's always fun. And that's another thing that my niece always rewatches. And it's funny because she kind of tells me things and she's like, "Did you know about this show?" I absolutely did, hun. It's a great show. So, and then No Educational Show Countdown is complete without talking about Reading Rainbow. And I don't think a lot of people know how long Reading Rainbow ran, but I, as a millennial, used to be shown Reading Rainbow before we went into the library for our period to pick books and things like that. And one of the episodes that we watched had to do with the first Harry Potter book, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or the Philosopher's Stone, wherever you guys are from. But they talked about how they read it and they enjoyed it. And at that point, that book had been out for at least 6 months and I had been avoiding it. But once it was on Reading Rainbow, I jumped in and I started reading Harry Potter in the 7th grade. And she had not finished publishing all of the books when I started writing it. So that'll tell you how long ago that was. But it all started with LeVar Burton. So I'm sure a lot of people have stories like that. But I used to want to be on that show talking about what books I read and how much I liked it or didn't like it or whatever. But we've come a long way. And to me, I think we need that show back as well. So more reading for people and children. Another show I used to watch, but I used to watch this before, like going to school when I lived in Massachusetts, and that is Ghost Rider. And that's something that I think should be on, PBS Kids at least on their app that you could watch again. So petition to bring that back. We need to start one. That and Carmen Sandiego. But it was basically a story that revolved around some friends that lived in Brooklyn. There's another kind of kid detective story thing that is apparently prevalent in my background for why I have an affinity for detective stories. And, you know, they stumble on a ghost who they call Ghost Rider, who only communicates with them through manipulating letters and text to help them solve crimes that were going on. And that aired on PBS from like 92 to 95. And I am pretty sure I have not seen all of the episodes, but I miss it. And so that would be something that I would watch with my nieces, excuse me, my nieces and nephews to get their feel of that. But I loved it. It was a cast of, you know, all multi-ethnic kids from Brooklyn, which was kind of down the street from where I was born. So I was like, yo, I want to get a team together and solve crimes. That's probably not a good idea for me, though. And all I need is a talking dog. It'll be great. So there you have it. And lastly, all of the shows I used to watch that scared the hell out of myself. So there you have it. I think it's easy to start with Goosebumps, which we all know was based on the book series. And I used to read that religiously, but that's an episode for another time. I just knew I wasn't going to miss this show. I used to have my dad like tape it for me because I could not believe my parents wanted me to leave the house when Goosebumps was on, especially on the weekend. Where are we going? What are we doing? Don't you know Goosebumps is on? And he found blank tapes for me so that we could tape it. But I remember to this day, the first episode that I watched was the one where the librarian is a monster, and The Girl Who Cried Monster is the name of the episode and the book. But no one believed her. And I remember like, why is she always at this library with this man? Goosebumps was fun, but a very stressful time for me. And I remember wanting to meet R.L. Stine just so I could tell him that he's the reason that I don't like ventriloquist dummies right now. And I understand that they've kind of done some movies and they've revamped kind of what the characters look like. But originally in the old TV show, Slappy had like orange reddish hair and these big eyes that used to move back and forth diabolically. And his eyebrows used to move up and down. And I was like, oh. To this day, that creeps me out. So, not a fan of ventriloquist dummies. Mr. Stine, thank you for that. And a couple other ones stick out in my mind. The Haunted Mask being one of them, because I just knew that Carly Beth was going to forever look like that. And I was freaked out for her. To this day, when I see like clips of that mask, it makes my skin crawl. But it was such a good mask. And it didn't help that he did like these intros where he was like, look at me in the mask. Doesn't this creep you out? Absolutely. Please don't. But I think my mom got tired of both the shows and the books, because I was planning on plowing through all 62 books, and she just got tired of buying them for me. And I think my teachers got tired of me doing book reports on Goosebumps, because but like, you're asking a 7-year-old to do a book report, so that's your first problem. So there you go. Next would have to be Are You Afraid of the Dark? I never missed it on SNCC. I was just old enough and having graduated from Goosebumps to kind of older stories, because nobody ever dies in Goosebumps. Other nefarious things happen to them, but they don't die. But Are You Afraid of the Dark that intro is creepy. And then understanding that you're sitting there, you've run out of your house at midnight to tell stories by this random campfire. You know, there's a couple of stories that I remember about the woman in the apartment, but she was really a ghost. The tale of the frozen ghost. A couple of other things. But again, these are on Paramount Plus, so I've been rewatching them as adults, and they're still creepy. Trust me. So, I also used to watch Tales from the Crypt Keeper. And there's something about that mummy telling stories that still creeps me out. Because I even used to watch Tales from the Crypt when I was young. But the Crypt Keeper episodes were animated, so I was like, oh, this will be fun. And they kind of were, because I was in my scare the hell out of yourself era. But if a scary story is not being narrated more or less by the creepy mummy, what is the point, you know? So there's that. So yeah, that's what my life had been about in TV shows as a kid.